Oi, oi boy. This one's gonna be fun. What's going on, YouTube? How you doing today? Today's episode is going to be another urban lakes breakdown. Today I'm at Kiwanis. Now, first off, this lake is nowhere near as good as it used to be 5 years ago, 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. This is the lake that I caught my first swim bait fish. This lake used to produce good fish, 6 to 8 pounds for me almost every time I went out fishing, and a double digit every now and again, but just barely scraping like 10 pounds. Unfortunately, about five or 6 years ago, they did a full lake restoration. They drained the lake to like 50%. There was only a little puddle out into the middle in the deepest point, and I'm pretty sure that most of the like good sport fish, aside from catfish and carp, pretty much died because they did that in the middle of summer when it was like 120 degrees. And the deepest this lake gets is 9 foot. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure most everything died. Anyways, again, urban lake breakdown video. I have plans to do Papago and Chaparral here coming up pretty soon, but today we're going to be focusing on Kiwanis. So sit tight. It's probably going to be a rough one. I bet it's going to be a rough one, but I'm going to kind of go through and talk about like trout fishing, bass, and catfish, since that's the 3 major species that I fish for here. And I know people love catfish fishing here in the spring and the summertime, and bass fishermen galore year round. So stay tuned. Hope you have fun. All right, welcome to Kiwanis, everyone. I apologize, the sun's probably going to be a bad glare in the camera for a little bit. Deal with it, because I have to deal with it. So Kiwanis is a temperamental but can be a very productive lake. Depends on when you're fishing it, in the spring, summer, fall, whatever. Right now I'm fishing, it's like mid-December on a Sunday, so there's going to be a lot of people. They have been stocking trout somewhat recently. I don't know when, as of this video, I don't know when the last trout stock was, but whatever. All right, big thing to consider if you're going to be bass fishing in this lake. The max depth is 9 feet. So we're not going to be fishing deep. We're not going to be fishing a whole bunch of offshore structure and whatnot. The lake is pretty much flat and featureless. There's rock piles every now and again, but it's not like Saguaro. It's not like Canyon. Oh. Apologies for making weird moaning noises into the microphone. That was the most substantial thing I've had for like 2 hours. All right, obviously, I'm gonna be mostly talking today about how I like to fish this lake and how I like to break it down. Obviously though, I'm gonna be fishing mostly reaction and swim baits, looking for better quality, better averages, and potentially one larger fish, which I know a lot of people nowadays really like doing, just focusing on getting 1, potentially 2 kicker sized kind of fish. I feel like there's a fish on a rock pile out there. When you're bass fishing, most of the time what you want to do is focus near the shoreline. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this lake, when it was clear, you have rock piles anything from 5 to 15, 20 feet off the bank. And coupled with the lake only having a max depth of 9 foot, where I'm casting is probably only like 4 foot. I'm not even joking, it's not deep at all. Out in the middle of this bowl here is 6 foot. If you want to know how I know that, I can put at the end of this video the link to the last video, and you'll actually see that just off the pier there and into this little bowl is only like 6 foot something. So not very deep at all. I've also taken my kayak out here into the middle part of the lake and have found a max depth of 9 foot. So not a lot of depth for the fish to cover, but the lake is 13 acres in total. So there's a lot of surface area that they can cover, just not a lot of depth, which is, it's good and bad. It's good because it kind of prevents fish from getting too far away from you, right? Because there's not going to be like a substantially deep depth of like 20 or 25 feet where you can't throw a swim bait from the shore without either getting it snagged or not fishing it effectively. But at the same time, it, like I've said, it kind of limits where the fish can go. So it makes everything a lot more accessible to cast to if you can reach it. And like I said as well, there's rock piles. When the lake was clear, you could very easily tell where all the rock piles are. I've been fishing this lake for 20 years, so I know where all the rock piles are. Also off this point here a little bit, there's a trash can out there. I don't know why it's there, but it's there. And I know fish will love to hold into it, and catfish will actually love to just sit inside it. So if you know that there's a fish there, that's a good spot to try to get a reactionary bite out of. From a territorial fish or hungry, who knows. But focusing along the shoreline, if you're bass fishing, focusing along the shoreline is probably going to help increase your catch rate. Not saying they're going to be big fish, it's just going to help you catch more fish. Now, I didn't only just bring swim baits today, both hard baits and soft baits. I also have, that might have been a rock, but I also have, I am horrible. I apologize, guys. I haven't been fishing in so long. The entire month of October, I basically didn't have a truck because of transmission and camshaft issues. And last week, I was supposed to come out here and record this video, but I couldn't because the check engine light came on again after having the truck back for like 2 weeks. Yeah, I've had a lot of truck issues. So it's made things very annoying, and I've kind of got trigger finger. Anyways, as I was saying, you want to focus along the shorelines if you're bass fishing. And I also said I have a Texas rig worm that I do plan on using as well. I don't have the right color, or the right color. I have the color that used to work for me in the past. It might not work anymore because the water has changed in clarity substantially. If anyone knows this lake before they did the lake renovations, you knew that this lake had a cycle of being clear in the summertime with the weeds and vegetation, and being somewhat dirty in the wintertime once all the weeds and everything die out. But it never got dirty. Like, it was a dark color and it would get muddy, but it was never horrible, right? It always gave you between like 4 and 2 feet of visibility, and then obviously perfect visibility in the summertime. That is no longer the case. Since they've done the lake renovations, they spent the first couple of years putting in a blue dye to help keep the weeds and the vegetation low, so that way, you know, it'd actually be fishable. But what that also did was it muddied up the water because we didn't have the plants to help kind of purify the water, if you will. The lake also is fed from a canal, and the canal is always dirty water, so that also doesn't help the clarity either. So what I'm starting off right now with is the Huddleston 60 Special in the Rainbow model. This is the ROF 12, rate of fall 12. The wind. So I'm trying to keep this on the bottom as much as possible, pull it around the rocks. Basically using it like a jig. And that's actually been one of my more successful ways of fishing a 68 in the first place, is kind of using it as a jig. Because it's a small enough presentation that both big fish and small fish will eat it no problem if they want to, but it also has enough thump and drawing power that the big fish look at it as a substantial meal. It can also be used slow right? I can reel it slow, or I can just drag it across the bottom like a jig and entice a more lethargic fish to take a very easy meal. Most of the time though, when I use it like a jig where I'm just hopping along the bottom, I end up catching more like 2 to 3 pound fish, but yeah, I'm absolutely fine with that. A hud fish is a hud fish. I'm not going to complain. Does this bait get stuck? A lot in the rocks. Depends on what you're doing. So the rock clusters around the shorelines, they are more like river rocks. They're rounded, they are placed so that way they're either just long stretches of rocks or they're in like round clusters. There is one right in front of me here, and it's about, I'd say 8 or 9 foot. It starts 8 or 9 feet off the shoreline, and then it's probably like 4 or 5 feet wide. But all it is just river rocks. So definitely you can get stuff like treble hook bait stuck in it, but if you're using something like a hud, as you can see, it's clearly stuck, but it will just come out as long as the bait doesn't roll and then get pinned on the side. As long as the bait is sitting upright and the hook doesn't actually penetrate into the rock, you're fine. It's also kind of hard to wedge this bait into the rock as well, especially if you are using it like a jig, because you can just pop it right over the rock. And that's usually when I get the bites. Not so much, weirdly enough, not so much in the wintertime does the 68 work for me. It's more of a spring and a fall bait. So, and I'm not talking about spring being the spawn. I hate fishing the spawn. I hate bid fishing. I will do whatever I can. See, I was just stuck and it just came right over the rock. I will fish pre-spawn and post-spawn. I avoid when the fish are on beds. I don't like it, and that's just personally me. You can do whatever you want, but that's just personally me. I don't like fishing during the actual spawn. But I will throw this out and use it as a jig for pre-spawn and post-spawn and late winter. So like late winter for Arizona is January, February, because come February, we usually start getting back into the 70s and 80s again. Some of our lakes can have fish spawning in the middle of February, which is weird for many of you because most of you are still ice fishing in February. Sometimes you can ice fish up until May if it's that cold. But our spawn in Arizona can begin as early as mid-February, usually around the 1st of March. But I will throw this in that like late January, February, and have a much better response than I do, say, in post-spawn. And in the summertime, kind of the same thing. It works, but the fish are more reactive. They want to chase more, they want lipless baits. You can do soft plastics, you can do jigs, you can do Texas rig worms, crawls, creatures, whatever. All of those will work, and especially if you do have the weed growth, then you're going to want to get along the reed lines. And in previous years, the weeds would get so bad that we would actually throw frogs and catch fish on frogs out here, which was a lot of fun. As I was saying about the hud, there's 2 basic ways that I'm going to fish this. One is like a jig, either slow hops or fast hops. Along the bottom, I like keeping it on the bottom, or maybe like 6 inches off the bottom if I am going to be reeling it straight, but I like keeping bottom contact with this. One of the major reasons that I like to throw this as a jig, the fish in this lake tend to be very reactionary. They love reaction baits, they love lipless crankbaits. Is probably one of my favorite bass lures to throw out here just to catch a fish. You know, if you're not really necessarily looking for big fish, if you're looking for just a numbers game, throwing like a 3/4 ounce or half ounce lipless is it's fantastic. Same thing with jerk baits too. And again, mind you, that the lake is not very deep, so you're not going to want anything that dives maybe more than 6 foot. You know, something that dives 4 or 5 foot is probably going to be a better bet. The fish are very willing to come up and react. And again, the lake being so shallow, it's very easy to just throw it in any vicinity of the fish, and it's, as long as the fish is close enough to it, they usually eat it. swim baits are a little bit different situation. You do kind of need that fish that's willing to take it rather than a true just reaction on strike it. Because even though it might hit it, you know, there's not a good chance that it'll actually hook up. Again, 1 pound, 2 pound fish, they might just hit the tail. I have a lot of times where I'll pull these lures in and the tail's half gone. And actually one time it was gone out of Papago. But because all the motion's in the tail, so they'll just grab the back part here. And a lot of times I'll just have the tail like rip right behind the fin there, which sucks. So keep a bottle of Mended or Hundelbod with you. Now if you're going to be big swim bait fishing, say like an 8-inch Hud or something else, definitely you can do that. I would recommend a 5 or a 0. Now I know the 0 was still made without the jig hook on it. The 5 in recent years was added with a top hook model. If you have an old Hud that doesn't have a top hook to it, it doesn't matter. You can Butch Brown rig it. You can do the stinger hook farther back with either braid or wire or something like that. You can put the treble on the bottom. If you're using a 5, an old 5, and you have a treble hook on the bottom, you're probably going to snag up a lot here, or at least get a whole bunch of crap off the bottom, because that hook's just going to be dredging bottom the whole time. You're going to pick up everyone's loose garbage, probably dead ducks and whatnot, because people will get stuck in the rocks, and then the duck goes down, eats their power bait, and the duck's there forever. So if you're going to be dredging this along the bottom, put the hook on top. It's going to save you a lot of heartache. Plus, if you do actually get a big fish that does choke it, the likelihood of the fish being hooked in the top of the mouth, or if it is like deep throated all the way in the back of the throat. Yeah, that's a 68 special. It's a small Huddleston. Yeah. All right, shout out to Justin. Just spent about 30 minutes talking to him. It's always nice to see new people and meet new people out here doing stuff like this. Actually makes me feel like it's worth it, or at least like someone's interested in watching. Anyways, it's been a while since I was talking about whatever I was talking about. Whatever though. I believe what I was talking about was fishing near the shoreline, making parallel casts. I think I was also talking about the color of the worm I have. So traditionally, like if you are going to be fishing a plastic worm or a beaver or some sort of craw or something like that, you want to go with the darker, more solid colors because they're going to stand out more in the watercolor. Personally, the color that I always use, and it didn't matter what time of day it was, what time of year it was the green, watermelon green, purple fleck. Oh my god, let me grab the bag. The watermelon purple glitter trick worm. This was by far my most deadly worm fishing here ever. And people argue with me this about all the time, but purple and red glitter for Arizona is absolutely a killer color, regardless of where you're fishing. That's why lures like the red oxblood and some of the other like red colored, actually speaking of that, I should put one on. Any of those like red oxblood, robo worms and whatnot, and anyone else that makes like some sort of like reddish, off red, orangish colors to either imitate like crawdads or something, because red and purple are really good colors for Arizona. Ask fly fishermen too. Some of their favorite colors to put on flies are going to be like purple, either like a purple flash or a purple dubbing for a core, like big streamer flies for Arizona. Again, just talk to someone who fly fishes for like big rainbows and browns with streamers. They're going to tell you that black, red, and purple are really good colors. And one of my favorite colors, which is no longer made anymore in this particular worm, was the Yum Ribbontail. My two favorite colors for that were Red Shad and Tequila Sunrise. Didn't matter where I took those out. Actually, Tequila Sunrise is still a really decent color all around. All right, go easy on me. I don't fish soft plastics like this much anymore, so bear with me if I fish too fast or I don't fish it right. I just don't fish these anymore. I just don't care to. It's too slow for me. Other than that, personally for me, for Arizona, I've always had good success with dragging. Most times, more times than not. So like 7 times out of 10, dragging a worm on the bottom, whether it be a straight tail or a curly tail, just dragging it slowly, always did far more success for me than hopping it. I know for other states, sometimes hopping it is more effective. Just for me, fishing slow, fishing pressure, just slowly dragging it along the bottom, always seemed to work better for me. And in the summertime too, when the weeds used to get really, really bad here, I'd actually use a 1/4 ounce or lighter to keep, you know, still get it down, but I would fish it on top of the weeds. And that's where having that lighter weight came in handy, because it wouldn't punch through all the weeds and the muck and everything, and I could fish it on top of the weeds where a lot of the fish were, or at least where a lot of the fish were feeding. And I remember there was a night, I think I caught like 50 or 60 bass. I was also fishing that very, very aggressively. Like I was hardcore hopping it, like moving it a foot or two at a time. They were eating it. They were eating it like they had never seen food before. I'm probably fishing this way too fast. I just, in the Red Mountain video, I stated I cannot fish slow. I can fish a swim bait slow. I just can't fish a Ned rig or a Texas rig or a jig slow. I just can't. I just can't. All right. So I think I've beaten this to death. Cast along the shorelines. Anything from, 30 feet out and less. A lot of the bass will sit on the outside or the inside of the rock, depending on the day and the time and how. If there's a lot of people on the lake, most of the time the fish are going to be in the outside of the rocks, just to try to avoid all the traffic and everything. If it's a slower day, so say you come out here on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday and there's absolutely no one out, the fish might be on the rock piles or on the inside of the rocks near shore. So keep an eye out for that. Just keep an eye out for where your casts are going and where you're getting the majority of bites. And who knows, sometimes you might just get a random fish out in the middle of the lake. And again, forgot what I was saying. Anyways, usually throw along the shoreline. Slow and simple is usually a trick. In the summertime, I've moved soft plastic baits kind of really aggressively and really quickly. But that was also, like I said, when there was a lot of grass and the water was a lot clearer, so it was a lot easier for the fish to actually see the baits. Right now it probably is going to be slow and steady. Just leave it there for a little bit, let them see it and actually come to it and then move it. Not so much the technique at Red Mountain. Like I said, you might have to leave the bait there for 30, 40 seconds, a minute, and then move it like 6 inches. I've always found that the largemouth in here have been more on the aggressive side. They do seem to prefer to chase things a little bit more. Definitely, you'll still catch them on stuff like Ned rigs and drop shot, shaky heads, Texas rigs, stuff like that. It still will catch fish. But if I was ever to come out here just to not even get a limit, just to come out in here and have fun, regardless if they were 1 pound, 2 pounds, 5 or 6 pounds, lipless was usually a good way to go, or some sort of like crankbait. Swim baits, the most effective swim bait for me by far out here has been a Huddleston, by far. Now the first swim bait fish that I ever caught was actually on the Savage Gear Hard 4 play. Literally the bait had only been out for maybe a month,
maybe like 2 weeks, and it was at the Sportsman's Warehouse near my house. I picked it up. I bought a rod specifically to throw a little bit larger baits, and I used the original Bass Pro Carbon line, right? The original orange reel that Bass Pro came out in like 2011, 2012, something like that. Whenever they came out with that. 2012? So yeah, that orange reel that they came out with in 2012, 2011, whatever it was. And it was literally my second cast with that swim bait. First cast wasn't even like a real cast, right? I just flipped it out just so I could see the action of it. And the second cast was an actual cast to throw it out and slowly fish it back. I got 4 cranks into it, let it pause, 4 more cranks, smacked it. But that was also in the middle of the lake. And they had stocked trout, I believe, like 2 or 3 days beforehand. So, or that week was the trout stocking. Anyways, it was like right at the time of the trout stockings. So the fish were fired up. They wanted the trout. They were ready to eat. Oh, that was an exhilarating moment. Y'all remember your first swim bait fish? Regardless if it was a small fish or a big fish, just like your first real swim bait fish, whether you were throwing like a 6-inch or an 8-inch BBZ, 8-inch Huddleston or a 6-inch Huddleston, Batesmith Mag, you know. Put it down in the comments, like, what was your first swim bait fish? And do you still remember it like it was yesterday? I sure do. I sure do. That's a moment that'll live with me forever. Now, if you've fished this lake long enough, you know a majority of the time the trout are going to be stocked off of the main boat ramp, or sometimes over here. Like, I remember they were doing construction on that boat ramp. I don't know why. I think it was to put the concrete around it. But they stocked, basically it was this bowl that they stocked in. And a lot of bass will hang into this area. And the trout, as long as it's not like right now and like still 70 degrees. You hear that, Minnesota? It's still 70 degrees and it's almost Christmas time. 70. If I wasn't worried about skin cancer, I'd be walking around in shorts and flip-flops. But it still is like 70 degrees. Water temperature is still a little bit warm. Trout right now are not on the aggressive side. People are catching trout, but it's mostly on like power bait, and I don't like fishing power bait. Have y'all learned that I don't like fishing slow? It's because I don't like fishing slow. Yeah, I won't throw out power bait. But if you're a trout fisherman, or you do seasonally transition between bass and trout and catfish, whatnot, this bowl is also really good for trout. As you can see, obviously there's a boat ramp and there are rentals that you can do. You can also take kayaks, canoes. I think that's it. You can take personal kayaks and canoes, as well as I believe like the portable flotation, or the portable inflatable kayaks, canoes. I don't think they want paddle boards in here because there's technically no weighting, like there's no body contact. So I don't think paddle boards are allowed, and there's no motors on the lake as well. So if you have a kayak or a canoe, if it has a trolling motor on it, just don't use it. You know, oars and paddles is the way to go. No float tubes are allowed here because, again, no water to body contact. Even if you're wearing waders, they won't allow that. But that gives you an option that you can come out here if you like to catfish fish. You can just find some of the deeper holes in the middle of the lake, just sit there and chill. Trout, same thing. You can even troll for trout. But I feel like talking about them little rainbows right now. All right, nothing too fancy here, guys. I just have my Daiwa Alphas Airstream custom BFS reel, my Mega Bass Destroyer Elise rod, You know, nothing too fancy, nothing too expensive. Not at all. This is just the rod that I had with me that was on the finesse side that I could throw a Castmaster. Trout, same thing for the lake here. They're stalkers. They're stock trout. What do you expect from stock trout? They're gonna chase anything that's shiny because they're stupid. And they're gonna eat anything that's salmon peach flavored because they're stupid. Traditionally, I like to fish off the dock. Most of my fishing is done off the dock. However, recently it just hasn't been that productive. Probably one, it's not sitting in deep enough water. Two, there's probably a lot of pressure because every time I come here, there's always people on the dock, except for now because the two guys that were up there with me, they left when I left, so. But I always like this bowl, and especially this little choke point right here. So we have the main stocking zone, this little bowl, 6 foot at its deepest point when the water gets high. It's probably, the lake looks a little bit low, so it's probably sitting at like 5.5 to 5 foot instead of like 6 foot. And then we've got this choke point right in here. So this is the passing zone between the stocked and don't worry about that. No one's dying or anything. There's a small parade going around and someone's got that like fire alarm horn going on. I think it's like a old, it's either old cars or classic cars parade, and they've been going around here for like an hour now. A little annoying, but whatever. Anyways, this is basically the only choke point in the lake. So all the fish that are traveling from the main lake and where they're stocked and vice versa, they have to go through here at some point. So sitting off at this point in the Ramada can be very productive. Can be. I say that. Is it always? Not always, because there's people here. Always. It gets a little bit deeper. So instead of it being 5-6 like in front of the pier, it's more like 6-7. Like I said, the lake is a little bit low right now, so we're probably looking at the 5 to 6 foot out in the middle here. For trout, that's relatively okay, because most of the time trout are going to be cruising fish. Trout, unlike bass and catfish, really are not comfortable sitting in one spot. Trout are migratory. They love to move. They love to roam. So even if they're going to sit in one area, they're really never going to sit in one spot. It's always going to be one area, but they might just make circles. They might just make laps around it, or just go back and forth like they're just pacing along like a ledge or something. And during good peak trout times, you will actually see that, because you might catch 4 trout in half an hour, or 5 trout in half an hour, or you know, whatever. And then all of a sudden for like an hour or two, there's nothing. And then say like an hour or 2 hours later, all of a sudden you just start catching fish. And it's probably what they've done is that they've moved into this smaller little section and then moved back in, or vice versa. So if you're sitting in one spot and you're not catching trout, and it's not like, oh, I was catching them, and then, you know, if you're just flat out not catching trout in that spot, you need to move, because they are not there. You might have the group move over there like maybe once in that time that you're fishing there, or maybe it was early in the morning, or maybe it's later in the afternoon when you're not there. Chances are, if you're not catching trout, you need to move, because if you're fishing with power bait and worms and whatever else, and if you're not getting bites on the bottom and you're not getting bites with lures, you need to move. Either move to a different spot or move to a different lake. And if you're trout fishing right now, like I said, it's still 70 degrees during the day. The trout do not want to eat. It's just too warm for them. They'll eat the power bait, but they don't want to chase. Another thing with the trout, in the past, the lake has usually had some good clarity, anything from like 2 to 4 foot, as I've stated before. Unfortunately now, since the renovations and they added the blue dye and the canal is really super dirty, the lake has maybe a foot to 2 foot of poor visibility. It's not just that it's dark, it's kind of dark and it's muddy. So it's just kind of really nasty to look at. In situations like this, golds and yellows have always been my go-to colors when I'm fishing with lures and spinners. So like yellow rooster tails, gold bladed panther martins in like size 6, size 4, or size 6, depending on how far you need to cast out. 1/8 ounce to 1/4 ounce Castmasters, usually gold or fire tiger or some sort of loud and obnoxious color that's either just going to be visible or it's going to have some good shine to it, right? I have the fire tiger because that's just currently what I have, but it has the gold side and then it also has the reflective fire tiger side. So even though Castmasters swim this way, they usually never see the fire tiger color. It's mostly going to be the gold, but I guess it's just because the straight gold wasn't working. I was like, well, I need to try and figure something out. But it's not working either. If you are trout fishing with power bait and whatnot, just try to make the farthest cast you can. There are trout that will kind of hug around the shorelines and whatnot, and they might be willing to feed, but chances are it's going to be like on a worm under a bobber, or use one of those floating worm little techniques. Power bait. Like I've said, the lake is not very deep, and most of the time trout are going to sit anything from like 1 to 2 foot off the bottom as they cruise. So if anything, make your leaders 14 to 18 inches from the weight. You don't need to go any more than 18 inches. Oh, but it's not in the face of the trout. If it's close enough to the trout and they can smell it, they will find it. That's total crap. If the lure or the bait is not directly in front of their face or above them, they won't eat it. That's absolutely false. If it is power bait, they can smell it. If it is a lure, they are going to see the reflective, the flash, and they're probably going to feel it. These are predators, mind you. These aren't as stupid as we think they are because they're not eating our baits. It's Mother Nature. They can still find it. Even in dirty ass water like this. My best swim bait fishing has come from water clarity like this, surprisingly. Bass will still find it. I think Oliver Nye even says that. Like, he's fished a lake for however long and he'll throw big swim baits and it's like the nastiest dirty color water he's ever seen, and he still catches swim bait fish. They're predators. They're opportunistic. If you get it close enough to them and it feels right to them, they'll eat it. There's a lot of stigma about fishing and whatnot about that. I say this a lot to a lot of people. Just throw it. Honestly, just throw it. You'll figure out that day if they want it or not. Like right now, they're not eating this. So either I'm not where they are or they don't want it. So either I have to change lures, change position, or go home. But I'm filming a video, so I'm not gonna go home. This is a side of the lake that I rarely fish, and there's mainly like 2 reasons why. 1, if I park in one of the main parking lots, I don't like walking all the way over here, and 2, I don't like parking across the residential in parallel parking. That's how my truck got hit last year, and yeah, flashbacks. But this side, pretty much starting from this walkway just before the little drainage ditch here, and then the rest of the lake into the second bowl down there, especially this side of the lake, is really, really nice for bass. Can you catch a bass here? Well, that's up to you and your skills, and if you come here on a right day and right conditions and everything. But on average, I see a lot of bass will hang over here, and when I'm actually fishing on my kayak, and if I've got my deeper sonar with me, I'll see more fish tend to hang on this side, specifically in this bowl, in this like main section of the lake, but they'll hang on this side. And I believe there's 2 reasons for that. 1, for the wintertime, this is where the hot sun gets most of, right? This is the east bank So most of the sun towards midday and late day is going to shine here. So the warm sun is going to warm this side up more. So if you're a bass fisherman, this side is really good for your bass. Catfish, same thing. This is one of the easier spots to hit some of the better catfish holes because there is a channel. It's like 1 to 2 foot wide. It's not very big. And it runs from the pipe all the way at the end of the lake through the middle, and it kind of zigzags a little bit through. But it goes through the channel in there, so it puts you at that like 7 foot mark, and then it goes underneath the boat ramp. But this is one of the sides that's actually easier to access that hole, along with, for bass, there's a lot of rocks along the bank here. And as I've mentioned many times, and if you come here and someone says, are you bass fishing? I guarantee you, if they've been here long enough, they're going to tell you right along the edge. And it's true. A lot of your bass will be right along the edge, as I've stated in this video, and as you'll probably hear, because the water, even low, is right along the bank, like 2 foot deep. And that's not even, it's 2 foot, and that's not even at full. Imagine if this lake was full. It'd be like 4 foot right along the shoreline, but right now it's probably like 2 foot. And then it's a slow, the whole lake, like I've said, the whole lake is a big bowl. It's a big, giant sand flat. So with rock clusters every now and again, here and there, but few and far between in the middle of the lake. And I know they put fish structures out there. I have not seen any, to be honest. Even with my kayak trolling, I have not seen any sort of, oh, the baby ducky, oh my gosh, oh, so cute. You're safe, buddy. I'm not going to turn you into a Polish dinner. I'm part Polish, so don't hate me. I'm actually Russian, Polish, Irish, and German, for anyone who doesn't care. I'm also probably going to throw out a glide bait here pretty soon, because I'm pretty sure that's what people want to see, is glide baits as well. Okay, back on the topic of bass for that. This is a very nice glide bait wall. The other side is nice. There's a lot of more expanses in between the rocks. There's also a lot of pressure over there because, as you can see right now, that is the shady side. So as much as the bass will sit on that side as well as they do here, I do tend to find, like I've said, more bass prefer this side. Go away, B. I don't want to play with you. And usually the side gets fished a little bit less because of the sun pounding into your face. And no one wants to be blind or have skin cancer. But I've also noticed that there's less rock piles on that side, and they are farther apart. Except for, all right, the bench. The bench is sitting on a point. It's a little bit to the right. For our point of view, it's a little bit to the right of the point. But, so basically where the tree on the left is, so you've got the bench, the first tree, and then the second tree. That's where the point comes out. And that point, as much as it doesn't really follow the contour of the lake and anything, that is a focal point where I've seen, personally myself, I haven't caught any big bass from there, but I have seen a lot of guys throwing swim baits off that point, especially on or the first couple of days after a trout stock, throwing stuff like MS Slammers, BBZs, and HUDs, and getting decent bass. Like I said, I haven't seen huge fish since. I think the biggest fish that I've seen since the renovation was 7 pounds. So before the renovation, 8, 9, 10 pounds was pretty common off of that point. Now it's like 7 pounds is decent for the lake. I actually should change up to a glide bait here. As much as I do want to throw the HUD or BBZ, I think right now, just to elicit a potential reaction strike, might be fun to do. Also because I just want to do it, so I'll be back. Voila, magic, floating BBZ. Ah, look at the fishy. The fishy. The fishy. The fishy. Don't mind me. I'm going crazy here. Going insane. I haven't eaten in like 4 days. Ran out of water like yesterday. So I'm going mad. I'm going mad. All right. If you have never used, sorry, I have to adjust the camera here. If you have never used a BBZ before, especially a floating BBZ, you're missing out. These things are fun. These things are a lot of fun. One, you can slow roll it. Make it look like a very, very injured, wounded, weird, just stock trout. Two, you can burn this thing. You can burn it, pause it, no, kick off. You can burn, kick off. You can hit it, and it makes splashy noises. And it'll kick. And it looks like a dying trout. It also has a, probably can't see it, it has a BB. Maybe you can see it. It has a BB in the ass end, in the actual last tailpiece. There's a big BB in it. That's why it's called the BBZ. This bait is very fun to throw. Regardless if you catch anything on it, it's very fun to throw. I've actually had quite a few ospreys attack this thing over the years. Fun times. But this is a very fun bait to work because you have different ways of fishing it to see how aggressive or how much your fish don't care. But it still is fun. It's very visual. It's a topwater lure. It's very visual. If you do get a reaction out of it, it's fun because at least you know it's working. It's also fun because it can be a dead stick bait. So on those really, really hard days where you're just like, screw it, I can throw it out by this pipe. Ah, yar! And now we wait. Yeah, for real. There's so many different ways of fishing this. Probably one of my favorites, just because it's the most... God, that sun is right in my face. Fish shield activated. All right. Like I was saying, it's one of my favorite baits to fish. The slow roll is probably one of my favorite ways to fish it. It's not necessarily the method that I see the most aggression towards. It's just the most fun way of having aggression towards it because you're reeling it slow. It's like a jig bite kind of thing. Don't get that confused. It doesn't feel like a jig bite, but it's the anticipation of a jig bite. Right? You throw this thing out, you're moving it ever so slowly. You don't know if there's anything behind it following it. You don't know when you're going to get hit on it. But when you do, it's a giant walloping thump. Obviously, this being a... Oh, it stabbed me. How dare it? Throw it in the brig. But it's a very heart-stopping thump when you get hit slow rolling or dead sticking this bait. And it's actually, if you're a striper fisherman, that's actually a deadly technique for throwing MS slammers and BBZs. Is in a trout fishery, something that has trout, throwing a BBZ or slammer and letting it just dead stick on the surface, so much fun. because it's just sitting there and you don't know when you're going to get hit. Again, it's like a jig bite. If you don't know when you're going to get hit, you don't know how big the fish is, but chances are on a big jig like a 1/2 ounce or a 3/4 ounce, chances are it's probably going to be a decent fish. And obviously with an 8-inch swim bait, your chances of the fish being 5 or 6 pounds is much higher chance of a 5 or 6 pounder eating this to a 2-pounder. However, in a recent post on Instagram, I posted a picture of a 2-pound bass that completely hard sideswiped a 250. I don't know what that fish was thinking, but it clobbered it. I don't know why. Wasn't doing anything special. I was just reeling it in. All of a sudden, I just felt thunk, and then dead weight, and it was hooked like a U. Someone over there, but I shouldn't scare them. Now, this goes back to the technique of parallel or slightly perpendicular to the shore, because this is a fun bait to throw right up against the shoreline. Are you swimming sideways? Don't you hate when your baits disrespect you like that? I certainly do. Anyways, back to what I was saying. This, or an MS Slammer, or any other big swim bait, wake bait style, can be really effective in small ponds like this, somewhat near the shore. And it's for 2 reasons. One, the closer you can get to the bank, and as long as you actually have deep enough water that a fish is going to feel comfortable eating such a big bait into this, especially like during the day like this, probably during the day, it's not going to be so much right up along the bank in shallow water because the bass isn't going to have too much of an ambush opportunity. That's why I'm throwing it more on like the inside edge of the rock pile, but also in between the rocks and the shore. So thereby it still gives the fish a opportunistic advantage, because if it's sitting on the outside of the rocks, I throw it on the inside of the rocks and slowly move it, there's a chance that the fish might think it has an opportunity and will come up and smack it. Or vice versa. If I know they're on the inside edge, I might throw closer to the bank to, again, get a much stronger reaction bite out of it. But if I'm going to be throwing this near the bank here, I'm more likely to slow roll this or dead stick it in key points rather than burn it, because it's going to be in shallower water. So it's going to make noise, and it's going to make a commotion. It's going to be known that it's there, regardless of how fast or slow I fish this. Just from the gigantic pelican smacking into the water, everything in the area is going to know it's there. Personally, for me, when I fish smaller topwaters, either poppers or spooks, the moment it hits the water, I'm usually moving it. Unless I know it is a true, like, sit there and wait kind of bite. With the BBZ and a slammer, I will let it sit there and wait for the rings to dissipate. And because of it being such a big bait, there's a high likelihood of getting, and this happens to me a lot, it doesn't get a hookup. So this bait for Kiwanis here for me, I get a lot of blowups on, but they're smaller fish on average, in the 2 to 4 pound range. And they can very easily eat the bait, right? Well, a 2-pounder can't eat the bait, but a 2-pounder will most definitely attack it. A 4-pound fish is a little bit more likely that they're gonna get a little bit more meat into it. And then something 6 to 10 pounds is the obvious choice that we're trying to target. That fish can just come up and pretty much engulf the whole thing. But I have a lot of fish in the 2 to 4 pound range, which is a surprisingly large average of the weight class of fish in here. It's about 2 to 4 pounds. And they will come up and hit this out of a reactionary or a territorial strike rather than a feeding opportunity, because I'll have them come up and they hit the back end. Or they come up and they try to just like hit it, or they'll hit the head as a, and not too many fish hook up. And of those fish that hook up, a lot of them end up throwing off because it's a very heavy bait. And I'm trying to force the fish harder than I should. Unfortunately, I just end up throwing the hooks. But, I mean, it is what it is. I catch more Hud fish out of here than I do on anything else, more consistently. Like, even if I don't necessarily have more bites on the Hud compared to some of these more reactionary baits, they eat the Hud. This is more of like reaction, like I was saying. The Hud, when I get a bite, 9 times out of 10, it's a full-on eat. 9 times out of 10, it's also like a 4-pound fish, which is kind of saddening. If I'm gonna throw this bait out into the middle of the lake, this is when I do a little bit more of the aggressive motion. You can very easily be aggressive with it along the shoreline, and that's definitely worked in like the late spring to summertime for me, moving it fast and getting very aggressive with it. But in the wintertime, when I'm trying to call a few more fish or get the elicit of maybe something a little bit bigger, something a little bit farther out, I do like to chuck this into the middle of the lake. Because as many times as I've said, and as many times as you hear that there's bass along the shoreline, there's also bass in the middle. Like, not every single bass is going to be along the shoreline, especially if they're chasing the trout that are cruising, the big trout eaters. If they're chasing the trout that are out in the middle cruising, they're going to be out in the middle. They're going to be where the trout are. Or if they know that at this particular point that the trout are closer to shore, they're going to sit farther out to help pin them against the shore. Again, throwing this in or near where the bigger bass are sitting, bringing it in is already giving you an advantage, because you're already giving that funnel, that focal point for the fish to have its opportunity. And also doing retrieves like this, where you really quickly, just like a bull shad, right? You throw it out, you burn it really quickly, and you let it sit and pause. The difference that because this floats, I can let this sit and pause for a couple seconds longer, or a minute or two if I actually really want to. If I'm fishing fast and aggressive like this, I'll maybe let it sit for like 5 or 6 seconds, maybe 10 seconds at most. But I'm mostly, if I'm gonna be burning it, I'm gonna try to keep it moving and keep the pauses to a minimum. Even if I'm gonna fish it aggressive, I'm still gonna wait for those rings to subside and then fish it. And I've got some homework for you guys too. If you've got any sort of larger 7 to 10 inch wake bait, and I'm not talking like walking baits, not like a little bassy, right? We're not throwing big punkers, we're not throwing other big walk the dog style baits. I'm talking like an actual wake bait, whether it's a lipped or lipless wake bait. That's something in that 7 to 10 inch range, either a BBZ or slammer. I dare you to throw it and see what kind of fish will follow you, because I guarantee you it's not just going to be bass. During the summer when I throw this out, I have so many carp of all things. Big carp, like the white mirrors, the grass carp, and big commons. They'll come up and they'll follow this thing. They're curious too. Something this big that has this much commotion, it attracts the attention of everything around it. So it's not just the bass that are going to be looking at it. I've even had, in the wintertime, trout will school with this in Huds, which is actually really funny to watch. But I've had trout school with this thing. But I've had so many carp in the summertime follow this bait. And I don't, not when I'm fishing it aggressively, but when I'm just slowly moving it like this, and I'm just slowly waking it, I've had 15, 20, 25 pound carp just come up and chill next to this thing. And when I dead stick it, they actually come up and investigate it. So if you don't think your swim baits and your other baits are getting looked at, they are. All right, so I've moved down a little bit. Don't know where the battery died. In my last speech, I was probably something along the lines of, even if I'm fishing fast, I still let the bait sit for a moment on the initial cast. So this little bowl in here is actually one of my favorite spots to fish for bass. I don't know why I don't fish down here more often. Probably just laziness. I don't want to walk all the way down here. And I'm not quite sure why the bass sit here too much, aside from there's a lot of structure, which I know will hold fish. But the bait isn't over here as much. So there are trout that will come down this far, but I don't usually see people catching trout down here. As the guy in front of me has a trout. Kind of funny that I say that, but I don't see a whole lot of people usually fishing down here. And I usually, aside from like people fishing in the spawn, I don't really see too many people actually fishing down here. But this is a good zone for bass. There's a bowl, a lot of rocks in here, and then from the kind of waterfall looking thing, there's a pipe. And I think that's one of the other feeder pipes that takes like sewage water and whatnot, not actual sewage water, but it takes like extra rainwater to help fill the lake. And again, a lot of rocks. There's probably some of the most amount of depth changes throughout here, because right after the rocks, there's actually a little bit more of a swoop. Not really big, not really too noticeable, but to a bass where there's basically featureless nothing, on the backside of rocks, where there's a little bit of a depression into a little bit deeper water, they will sit there. And that's like this through this entire section up to kind of about where that other Ramada is. And I'm sure we've all seen this rock pile here. I have pulled some decent fish off of it. It does hold some, I should have made that cast a lot farther. It does hold some decent sized fish off of it. But they are a little bit harder to get because obviously it's right next to the shore. There's always going to be traffic and people, and it gets hammered a lot. So anything that does sit underneath there, it's a lot harder to get. But this spot, there's two reasons that I like this spot. One, on the inside for the waterfall. In the summertime, sunfish do like to sit up into the waterfall, and there's water flowing from it, that's even better. But you have different structures. You've got the Ramada on the one side, you've got a little bit of a point to shallowish water, deeper water. The pipe is actually about right in front of me, probably like 15 feet out or so. But it comes out at kind of an angle, and then it goes out more into like the middle part of the lake. But that is significantly in that section much deeper than anything else around it. Fish will hold in that and use that for both sides as an ambush point, especially along this bank, as probably a little bass, but yeah, little bass chasing probably a little either baby bass or bluegill. But if you're fishing with glide baits, and I don't like this is one thing I don't want to say, but it's helpful. This is an area where glide baits are actually very effective. Not only where they stock the trout are like HUDs and glides useful, but over here as well. And surprisingly enough as well, I catch a lot of catfish on glide baits over here. Sounds kind of weird, but everything holds in that deep water. The carp, catfish, the bass. And with my kayak fishing, casting towards the shore, fishing out, I notice as soon as I get over the ledge into that hole, catfish. Now if you're a catfish angler, even though like I just said, I catch a lot of bass or a lot of catfish on swim baits on this side, it's a good place to sit if you are catfish fishing, especially in the summertime, because you've actually got the bank across from you is high enough that you can actually get some sun fairly early into the afternoon. There's also water right behind you, little fountain. Probably wouldn't drink from it because of AIDS. You can either fish from the Ramada, casting out into this bowl, or anything along this bank, casting into this bowl. But again, this is one of the, in just certain places of the lake, this is one of the deeper bowls that's more consistently into that like 8 to 9 foot zone, rather where in the middle, like just the whole bottom, the whole flat there is 7, 8, 9 foot. Out here, it drops more quickly. So it's gonna be able to hold, it's got the terrain that more fish are gonna wanna hold up against, rather than the rest of the lake just being a giant bare sand flat. Hardly any structure, nothing really to hold fish except for the trout. Whereas in here, there's just a lot more of the contour where the fish are gonna actually wanna hold. Like I said though, I don't really catch trout over here, but it just has really good hiding holes. Now, even though I only fish the east side, so I fish the bowl on the east side of the lake here, that doesn't mean that that's the only good side of the lake. Go ahead and fish that, and also fish however you like to fish for the entire lake. Like I've said, more often than not, the fish are going to be closer to the bank. Unfortunately, I can't, today being a Sunday, I can't fish close to the bank like I would like, because there's a lot of people here, there's a lot of people fishing. I don't want to cross anyone's lines, especially throwing a giant swim bait. But plastic worms and whatnot, jigs, swim baits, if you're bait fishing, you know, your standard catfish baits and trout baits. Like I said, I like the 2 points, the point that's closer to us here, and then the opposite point where I was fishing with the other chair, all along the right bank, the east bank here. Really good for bass. It's also really good for catfish because you can cast and get fairly close to where some of the fish are going to live in the deeper water. Also helpful in the summertime as well, because a lot of fish will push into the deeper water to try to get into a little bit cooler water. However, obviously, if the water's 90 degrees on the surface, 8 feet down, it's probably... Alright, this is the last place that I'm going to talk about before I head on out. So off to the left is the first Ramada as you come in, obviously the fishing dock and the boat ramp. Then off to my right is the bowl where I just came in from. Across from me, from where I kind of began the walk on this side, is that one drainage pipe. To kind of give you a reference of where I am, I'm in that point that I said was opposite. So like this point and the other point across have been very successful points. That point across has been successful for me for bass. This point has been successful for other people. I do good with trout here and carp. So if you're also a carp angler, this lake has some really big carp. And I've had a lot of people, and I've seen people, granted this was 10, 15 years ago, throwing HUDs and BBZs and other homemade giant floating swim baits. But they did really well here. Normally it was around the spawn or on cloudy days when topwater works more effectively. But they were catching 4, 5, 6, 8 pound largemouth. And the lake definitely had those fish back in the day. As of right now, I'm not quite sure. The biggest that I've seen is 7. I would hope there are some other giants. I just haven't seen any since the renovations. This is about the one place where I'm going to say casting near the bank is good, but you also want to cast out. I don't know what it is about this spot, because when I came over with my kayak and I tried to map it, there really wasn't anything significant to this aside from a little bit more of a point, because we come from this little basin, you know, this cut, and then it comes out into this point, at least on the bank, and then we have this flat spot. I know trout love to hold here, and there's nothing on the bottom. There's no structure. There's no real big divots or breaks or anything. So structure-wise, there's not really anything that tells me fish are going to hold here, aside from this is a place where trout love to hold. So that's about the only reason that I have left to understand why the bass like to hold off at this point. The food's here. Now, if you're a catfish or a carp angler, obviously you can just long bomb anything you have, and you can get into the middle of the lake fairly efficiently. If you're a trout angler, kind of the same thing. It doesn't take a very far cast to have some distance. Honestly, I probably should be slow rolling this, because that's what everyone else does. Slow rolling the BBZ and slow rolling a HUD were the two methods, or any sort of like bigger waking swim bait was always told to me was a good thing, as well as HUDs. I had a lot of people before I started fishing HUDs would tell me that Huddleston's 8-inch HUDs, just chuck them out here and slow roll it. Now, when I say they used to catch them all the time, it would be out of when I was younger, actually fishing here when I was like 10. I would hear about once a month someone getting a fish over 5 pounds. I should say maybe like over 7 pounds. So in that 7, 8, 9 pound range was once a month. People consistently fishing here, catching 4 to 5 pound fish was a lot more consistent. And since it has been about 5 or 6 years whenever they did the restoration, I would imagine that any of the original stockers are probably in that 5, 6, 7 pound range right now, which is the biggest fish that I've seen since then. It's like 7 pounds. So that 100% makes sense. I might throw the HUD. I might throw the HUD. Oh, that was a Troutus. Pretty sure that was a Troutus. I'm actually gonna try Castmaster right now, because it looks like there's some trout. And if not, maybe some baby bass. Alright, time for the HUD. Now, if you're fishing glide baits, something like an S-Waver, which is my favorite glide bait of all, especially for ponds, this point and this, pretty much just this point, I find, again, same thing with the swim baits and like the top water and the HUDs. Glide baits also work fairly well here. I have more success off this point with a 168 S-Waver and other smaller glide baits rather than I do bigger glide baits. The bigger glide baits, I usually have better luck off of the point, that Ramada, because there's like a bowl there, obviously where they stock the trout, and then to the right where the little waterfall thing is, that's where the bigger glide baits work better for me. But if you have a S-Waver 168, this bench on this point, good place to do it, as well as along this ledge here, not this ledge, this, just this kind of straighter walkway, because there's a lot of rocks fairly close together, and those fish will sit You're not going to get anything too big, like the same 2 to 4 pound range. Mostly 2s and 3s, schoolie size. But they will smack it with vengeance, especially if you use it kind of more like a jerkbait style where you're a lot more twitchy and faster and aggressive. They do come out and they whack them hard.
Alright, so that's going to wrap it up for this video. Hopefully you learned something today. If you fish Kiwanis, maybe you learned something. If you wanted to fish Kiwanis, well, it's a good opportunity. Right now during the trout season, the trout get really active once the water temperature cools down, obviously. It still is kind of warm. We're in that weird period where it's starting to get too cold for the bass to be really active. Catfish are very hit and miss, and the carp right now are pretty much inactive. But it's also still a little bit warm for the trout to be super active. So it's a weird lull period, to say the least. Trout fishing, I would recommend just using power bait or worms or something on a bobber or on the ground on the bottom. If you're bass fishing, you can try reactionary stuff. You can try your Ned rigs, your jigs, shaky, whatnot. A lot of people do that. I know a lot of people have success out here doing that. So you might also have to deal with some pressure, and fish seeing presentations like that a lot. So, but also like to each their own. Hopefully you learned some of the key points where I like to fish and where I usually have success. It's been tough. People have been getting some fish in the urban lakes, but it's not a daily thing. It's not every time you go out you get something. I think one person caught 4 trout today. That was it. I didn't hear anything about catfish. I didn't hear anything about carp. No bass. Nothing. I've been coming out here actually for the last couple of weeks, and kind of the same results. Not really anyone's catching anything. I think that has to do, like I said, the temperatures are just kind of weird right now, and the water quality is not the best. Game and Fish has been coming out here, I think, once a week. Someone who's been fishing out here quite regularly told me that Game and Fish officers have been coming out once a week to monitor the pH of the lake and figure out how everything's going with that. I do know over the last couple of years, there's been a couple times for like catfish stockings, they haven't stocked the lake due to pH, and I believe there's been a couple times with trout stockings as well. They have postponed stockings because of pH and other water quality issues. But if this is just close enough to you, obviously this is what you're gonna fish. If you're a swim bait guru like me, just dedication, just throw it. HUD for me, personally, that's what I throw like day in and day out if I'm here looking for a swim bait fish. Or an S-Waver. Those are like kind of the 2 go-tos that I have here. If you're just a standard bass fisherman with conventional gear, lipless, worms is usually my go-tos for that. And you can get inexpensive stuff for that. You don't have to spend $1 million on swim bait gear and high-end stuff. Just Sportsman's or Bass Pro Cabela's, and just get yourself a decent setup and you're good to go for that. Trout, Castmasters is usually my go-to. With the quality of the water being so bad right now, I'd recommend probably like orange or like Sherberts. Salmon peach is another power bait color. So that's if you want to keep trout, right? That's if you want to keep the trout. Use the power baits. If you are a fisherman like me and you like to fish more aggressive and more fast-paced, Castmasters, Rooster Tails. I prefer gold colors, whether the whole thing is gold or yellow. Usually best success. There's sun fishing here year-round, so obviously you can just take the kids out here to maybe have a good sunfish day. In the spring and summer, sunfish is really good out here. And if you're a carp angler, there's a lot of good carp in this lake as well. Pretty much for that one, they're everywhere. Just find a spot that you want and just cast out. That's my advice for that. Catfish, kind of the same thing. Just find a spot that you feel comfortable in, cast out. For catfish, if you're not going to fish the dock, the fishing pier as you first come in, I'd move into either the original channel, that choke point from the beginning of the video, or come into more of the main lake and just cast out as far as you can. Anchovies and mackerel work really well. I prefer mackerel because it stays on the hook a little bit better. Other than that, hopefully y'all learned something. Sorry I didn't catch anything. That's how fishing actually works. A lot of times, go fishing a lot with some catching. It is what it is. All right, everyone. Peace out.
I'm not sure, but I think I have a problem. Probably can't see it. Maybe you can see it. There's a goldfish. Oh my god. There's a goldfish. I can't zoom in, but there's a goldfish. Nah. Just gonna try the HUD. Might work, might not. Who knows? If it doesn't, you won't see anything after this.